The most expensive mistake in business is assuming wisdom only comes with age. The words were printed on a banner hanging above the main stage of the National Youth Innovation Showcase in downtown Chicago, but almost nobody paid attention to them that morning. Hundreds of students, teachers, investors, entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders filled the massive convention center. Bright lights reflected off polished floors while dozens of technology exhibits stretched across the exhibition hall. At the center of the event stood 13-year-old Jordan Brooks, a black middle school student wearing a clean blue jacket and holding a tablet filled with charts and notes. He had spent months preparing for this opportunity. Unlike many participants, Jordan was not presenting a robot, a mobile game, or a flashy invention. He was presenting an idea, a simple system designed to help large companies identify customers who were likely to leave before contracts expired. To most people, it sounded like an adult business problem. To Jordan, it was simply a pattern. He had studied customer behavior, reviewed public case studies, and built a predictive model that could help businesses react before losing valuable relationships. Most visitors walked past his booth without understanding it. A few stopped long enough to ask questions. Then everything changed when Nathan Whitmore arrived. Nathan was one of the most recognized CEOs in the country. His technology company generated billions of dollars in annual revenue. Wherever he went, cameras followed. Event organizers rushed to greet him. Students whispered excitedly as he approached different exhibits. Jordan watched from behind his display table as Nathan moved through the hall. He never expected the CEO to stop at his booth, but he did. Nathan glanced at the presentation board and then at the charts displayed on Jordan's tablet. "What do we have here?" he asked. Jordan smiled. "A customer retention prediction model, sir." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Customer retention?" Jordan nodded. "Companies usually react after customers decide to leave. This system helps identify warning signs earlier." A small crowd began forming around the booth. Several attendees recognized Nathan and stopped to listen. Jordan explained how companies could monitor engagement patterns, service interactions, and account activity to identify risks before major contracts disappeared. He spoke clearly and confidently. For a moment, Nathan listened. Then the CEO smiled and shook his head. "That sounds interesting," he said, "but billion-dollar companies do not operate on school project theories." A few people nearby laughed politely. Jordan remained calm. Nathan continued. "Real business is more complicated than spreadsheets and predictions." More laughter followed. The smile on Jordan's face faded slightly, but he did not argue. He simply looked at the CEO and asked one question. "What if your biggest client asks about this exact problem?" Nathan barely paused. "They will not." Then he turned and walked away. The crowd followed him toward the next exhibit. Within seconds, Jordan was standing alone again. But as he looked down at the tablet in his hands, he noticed something unusual. One engineer from Nathan's company had remained behind, and the expression on his face suggested he had been listening very carefully. The engineer waited until the crowd had completely disappeared before stepping closer to Jordan's booth. He was in his early 30s, wearing a company badge with the name Ethan Walker printed beneath the Whitmore Technologies logo. Unlike the others who had laughed and moved on, Ethan looked thoughtful. He glanced at the charts on Jordan's tablet and then back at the teenager. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan nodded. "Of course." Ethan pointed toward one of the graphs. "How did you identify these risk patterns?" Jordan immediately opened another section of his presentation. The screen filled with data points, trend lines, and customer activity models. For the next several minutes, he explained his process. He spoke about engagement declines, response delays, support interactions, and behavioral changes that often appeared months before a client decided to leave. Ethan listened carefully. The more Jordan explained, the more serious his expression became. Finally, he folded his arms. "You build all of this yourself?" Jordan nodded. "Mostly. My computer science teacher helped me organize some of the data." Ethan looked at the screen again. "This is impressive." Jordan smiled politely. "Thank you." For the first time since Nathan Whitmore had walked away, someone was actually listening. Ethan glanced around the nearly empty exhibit hall. "Would you mind sending me a summary?" Jordan hesitated. "You think somebody would read it?" Ethan laughed softly. "I cannot promise that, but I would like to." Jordan immediately opened a file and exported a short presentation packet. It contained the problem, the supporting data, and a proposed solution. Within seconds, Ethan received the document on his company email account. "I appreciate it," he said. Jordan nodded. "I appreciate you asking." Meanwhile, across downtown Chicago, Nathan Whitmore was already focused on something else. His driver pulled up to a luxury office tower overlooking the Chicago River. The upcoming meeting represented months of negotiations. A major enterprise client was expected to finalize a partnership worth $50 million. Executives from both companies would soon gather around a conference table to complete the agreement. Nathan stepped into the building feeling confident. The numbers looked strong. The forecasts looked strong. Everything appeared ready. Back at the convention center, Jordan began packing his materials. The excitement of the morning had faded. He could still hear the laughter from the crowd when Nathan dismissed his idea. It hurt more than he wanted to admit. Not because the CEO disagreed with him. Jordan understood that happened. What bothered him was that Nathan never really considered the idea at all. Still, Jordan refused to let disappointment define the day. He carefully placed his tablet inside his backpack and started organizing his notes. Before leaving, he looked once more at the banner hanging above the stage. The same quote remained there. "The most expensive mistake in business is assuming wisdom only comes with age." Jordan smiled faintly and headed toward the exit. At that exact moment, several miles away, Nathan entered the conference room where the largest deal of the year was about to begin. Neither of them knew that within a few hours, they would both be thinking about the same question. The conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked the Chicago skyline, but nobody paid attention to the view. Every person seated around the polished table was focused on the opportunity in front of them. The partnership under discussion would become one of the largest agreements Whitmore Technologies had signed all year. Nathan Whitmore sat at the head of the table with the confidence of someone who had negotiated deals worth far more than $50 million. Across from him sat executives from Horizon Retail Group, a rapidly growing company with thousands of locations across the country. Lawyers reviewed documents. Financial analysts compared projections. Presentation slides moved smoothly across a giant screen mounted on the wall. Everything appeared to be going exactly as planned. Nathan smiled as one of his vice presidents finished reviewing the final growth forecasts. "This partnership creates value for both companies," he said. Several executives nodded. Horizon's leadership team appeared satisfied. For nearly an hour, the conversation moved forward without any major concerns. Then something changed. The chief operating officer of Horizon leaned forward and folded her hands. "Before we move toward final approval," she said, "there is one issue we need to address." The room immediately grew quieter. Nathan remained calm. "Of course." The executive looked toward the screen. "Customer retention." Several people exchanged glances. Nathan was not concerned. Customer retention was a common topic during negotiations. "What specifically would you like to discuss?" he asked. The executive clicked a remote. A new slide appeared. Several charts filled the screen. The data showed declining engagement trends across multiple customer segments. "Our analysts believe this risk could increase over the next 18 months, she explained. "We need to understand how your company plans to identify vulnerable accounts before they leave." Nathan's smile faded slightly. He expected a routine question. This looked far more detailed. The executive continued. "We are not interested in reacting after customers decide to leave. We want a predictive solution." Something about those words felt strangely familiar. Nathan pushed the thought aside. One of his senior managers began describing current monitoring systems. The explanation sounded reasonable, but Horizon's team remained unconvinced. Another executive asked a follow-up question. Then another. The discussion became increasingly technical. Nathan noticed members of his own team searching through documents and reports. Confidence slowly gave way to uncertainty. The problem was not that they lacked data. The problem was that nobody seemed to have a clear answer. Across the table, Horizon's leadership team remained patient but visibly concerned. Minutes passed. More questions appeared. Fewer answers followed. Nathan could feel momentum shifting. For the first time that afternoon, the deal no longer felt guaranteed. Then one sentence from Horizon's chief operating officer caused the entire room to stop. "If your company cannot predict customer departure patterns before they become visible, we may need to reconsider the structure of this agreement." Silence filled the conference room. Nathan looked toward his team. Nobody spoke immediately. Then, near the far end of the table, A young engineer named Ethan Walker suddenly sat upright. His eyes widened as if he had just remembered something important. Slowly, he opened his laptop and searched for an email he had received only a few hours earlier. Ethan Walker barely noticed the silence spreading through the conference room as his fingers moved across the keyboard. While executives continued discussing customer retention concerns, he searched through his inbox for the message he had received earlier that afternoon. Around him, the atmosphere had changed completely. Just 30 minutes earlier, everyone had expected a celebration. Now uncertainty sat at the center of the table. Nathan Whitmore watched Horizon Retail Group's leadership team carefully. Years of experience told him something important. This conversation was no longer about technical details. It was about confidence. If Horizon believed Whitmore Technologies could not solve the problem, the partnership itself could disappear. The chief operating officer from Horizon folded her hands. Our board is very focused on long-term client stability. Her voice remained professional but firm. We need evidence that your company can identify warning signs before major accounts begin leaving. Nathan nodded. We understand the concern. Yet even as he spoke, he knew his team still lacked a clear answer. Ethan finally found the email. His eyes moved quickly across the screen. The attachment was exactly where he remembered leaving it. Jordan Brooks. Customer Retention Prediction Model. Ethan opened the file. The first page appeared. Immediately, his expression changed. Every concern Horizon had raised during the meeting seemed to appear inside the document. He began scrolling faster. Risk indicators, behavioral patterns, engagement tracking, predictive account scoring. Detailed explanations filled every page. Ethan looked up toward the giant presentation screen, then back to the document, then back to the screen again. His heart began beating faster. Nathan noticed the movement. Ethan, several executives turned toward him. Ethan hesitated for only a moment. I think I found something. The room became quiet. Nathan frowned. What is it? Ethan stood slowly. An analysis. Nathan looked impatient. From who? Ethan swallowed. The student from the innovation showcase. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Nathan stared at him. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Horizon's chief operating officer leaned forward. Can we see it? Ethan connected his laptop to the presentation system. A new document appeared on the giant screen. The title alone captured everyone's attention. Predicting customer departure before traditional warning signals appear. The room fell silent. Ethan opened the first section. Charts appeared, then customer behavior models, then predictive analysis diagrams. Horizon's executives immediately focused on the screen. Nathan felt an uncomfortable sense of recognition. Some of the terminology sounded familiar. Then he remembered the conversation at the showcase. Jordan. The boy had been discussing this exact issue. Ethan continued scrolling. Every page seemed more detailed than the last. The analysis explained how subtle changes in customer behavior could reveal future risks months in advance. It proposed a framework for intervention before accounts became unstable. Horizon's leadership team exchanged surprised glances. One executive began taking notes. Another leaned closer to the screen. The discussion shifted completely. Questions were no longer directed at Nathan's team. They were directed at Jordan's model. Ethan reached the final section and stopped. The room became completely silent. At the bottom of the page was a projection. Estimated retention improvement if implemented successfully. Nathan stared at the number. Horizon's executives stared at the number. Nobody said a word. Because the projected value exceeded the entire $50 million partnership currently sitting on the table. Nobody in the conference room spoke for several long seconds. The projected value remained displayed on the giant screen while executives from both companies stared at the number. The analysis suggested that successful implementation of Jordan Brooks's model could preserve revenue far beyond the value of the partnership itself. What had started as a routine negotiation had suddenly become something entirely different. Horizon Retail Group's chief operating officer leaned forward first. Who created this model? Her voice broke the silence. Ethan Walker glanced toward Nathan Whitmore before answering. A student I met earlier today at the National Youth Innovation Showcase. Several Horizon executives looked surprised. One of them frowned. A student? Ethan nodded. 13 years old. More silence followed. Nathan sat motionless. Just hours earlier, he had dismissed the same idea in front of a crowd. Now some of the most experienced business leaders in the room were studying it with complete attention. Horizon's chief executive officer slowly turned another page of the document. This is unusually thorough. Another executive agreed. The methodology is clear. A third added, and the behavioral indicators match concerns our analysts have been tracking for months. Nathan listened without speaking. Every compliment directed toward the model felt like a reminder of the conversation he had already forgotten. Ethan continued scrolling. Charts appeared. Risk scoring systems appeared. Customer engagement thresholds appeared. Every section seemed to answer another question Horizon had prepared. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The uncertainty that had threatened the partnership began giving way to curiosity. Horizon's leadership team no longer looked skeptical. They looked interested. Then one executive pointed toward a section near the end of the report. "What is this?" Ethan opened the page. The room immediately grew quiet again. The title read Pilot Implementation Scenario. Jordan had not simply identified the problem. He had proposed a step-by-step rollout strategy. Timeline estimates, resource requirements, testing phases, performance benchmarks. Everything was organized with remarkable clarity. Horizon's chief operating officer shook her head slowly. This was developed by a middle school student? Ethan smiled faintly. Yes. Several executives exchanged amazed glances. Nathan looked toward the window overlooking Chicago. For the first time all afternoon, he felt genuinely uncomfortable. Not because Jordan's idea was working, because he remembered exactly how quickly he had dismissed it. Across the table, Horizon's chief executive officer closed the document and folded his hands. The room immediately became still. Everyone knew his opinion mattered most. He looked directly at Nathan. "I have a question." Nathan nodded. "Of course." The executive tapped the printed copy of Jordan's analysis resting in front of him. "If someone in your organization had access to this solution hours ago, why was it not part of today's presentation?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ethan looked down. Several Whitmore executives avoided eye contact. Nathan felt every person in the room waiting for an answer. The truth was simple. The truth was embarrassing. And the truth would be difficult to explain. Before he could respond, Horizon's chief operating officer asked another question. This one was even worse. "Did someone bring this idea to your attention before today's meeting?" The room fell completely silent. Because for the first time that afternoon, Nathan realized he would have to decide whether to protect his pride or tell the truth. The silence in the conference room seemed to stretch forever after the question was asked. Nathan Whitmore looked around the table and saw something he rarely encountered during negotiations. Nobody was focused on numbers anymore. Nobody was focused on contracts. Everyone was focused on him. Horizon Retail Group's executives waited patiently. Ethan Walker sat quietly beside the presentation screen. Several Whitmore Technologies executives avoided eye contact altogether. Nathan understood why. The answer was simple. The answer was uncomfortable. And the answer would reveal far more than anyone expected. He took a slow breath. Yes. The room became even quieter. Horizon's chief operating officer tilted her head slightly. "Someone did bring this idea to your attention?" Nathan nodded. "Earlier today." Nobody interrupted. Nathan continued. "I attended the National Youth Innovation Showcase this morning." Several Horizon executives exchanged curious glances. The model was presented there. Ethan looked down at the table. He already knew where the story was heading. Nathan folded his hands. "The student explained the concept directly to me." The words hung in the air. Horizon's chief executive officer looked at the document again, then back at Nathan. "And you chose not to pursue it." Nathan did not answer immediately. Every second felt longer than the one before. Finally, he nodded. "That is correct." Across the table, the Horizon leadership team exchanged another round of looks. Nobody appeared angry. In some ways, that made the moment even harder. They simply looked confused. One executive spoke carefully. "May I ask why?" Nathan stared at the charts displayed on the screen. Hours earlier, he would have had dozens of confident answers. Now none of them sounded convincing. "Because I underestimated the source." The room became silent once more. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. Several Whitmore executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nathan continued speaking. "I looked at a 13-year-old student and assumed I already knew the value of the idea before hearing the entire explanation." Nobody interrupted. The honesty surprised everyone. Horizon's chief operating officer glanced toward the presentation screen. Yet the analysis addresses every concern we raised today. Nathan nodded. It does. The executive leaned back in her chair. That is unfortunate. Nathan understood exactly what she meant. The missed opportunity was not simply professional. It was personal. A solution had been available. A warning had been available. Insight had been available. He simply chose not to see it. Then something unexpected happened. Horizon's chief executive officer smiled slightly. Not a mocking smile. Not a triumphant smile. A thoughtful one. You know, he said, most leaders spend years teaching people to speak up. The room listened carefully. The best leaders spend even more time learning how to listen. Nobody spoke. The statement landed with remarkable force. Nathan looked down briefly. Across the room, Ethan remembered Jordan's final question from the showcase. What if your biggest client asks about this exact problem? The memory hit him immediately, because that was exactly what had happened. The same concern, the same challenge, the same opportunity, hours apart. Then Horizon's chief executive officer pointed toward Jordan's analysis on the screen. Can this solution still be developed? Every head in the room turned toward Ethan. He studied the document again before answering. Yes. The executive nodded. Good. Then he closed his folder and looked directly at Nathan. Because before we decide the future of this partnership, there is someone I would very much like to meet. For a moment, nobody in the conference room spoke after Horizon's chief executive officer made his request. The statement seemed simple, yet everyone understood its significance. The future of a $50 million partnership was now connected to a 13-year-old boy sitting somewhere across Chicago. Nathan Whitmore looked toward Ethan Walker. Do you know how to contact him? Ethan nodded. Yes. Nathan took a slow breath. Then call him. Ethan immediately reached for his phone. Several Whitmore executives exchanged nervous glances. Across the table, Horizon's leadership team appeared surprisingly interested. The conversation had shifted completely. Earlier that afternoon, Jordan Brooks had been dismissed as a student with an unrealistic idea. Now senior executives were waiting to hear his thoughts directly. Ethan stepped outside the conference room and placed the call. Meanwhile, several miles away, Jordan sat at a small table inside a neighborhood community center. Every Tuesday evening, he volunteered there after school, helping younger students learn basic computer skills. Laptops covered the tables around him. Children worked on coding exercises while Jordan moved from seat to seat answering questions. The disappointment from the innovation showcase had mostly faded. He was focused on helping others. Then his phone vibrated. Jordan glanced at the screen. Ethan Walker. He looked surprised but answered. Hello. Ethan smiled immediately. Jordan, it is Ethan. Jordan recognized the voice. Hi. Ethan hesitated. He still could not believe the situation himself. I need to ask you something unusual. Jordan listened quietly. Ethan looked through the conference room glass wall at the executives waiting inside. Would you be available for a video call? Jordan frowned slightly. Now. Ethan laughed nervously. Yes. Jordan glanced around the community center. Several children were working nearby. What is this about? Ethan took a breath. Your customer retention model. Jordan sat a little straighter. What about it? Ethan looked back toward the conference room. A lot of people want to hear more. 20 minutes later, a large video screen flickered to life inside the executive conference room. Jordan appeared on the display wearing the same blue jacket from the showcase. The background behind him showed bookshelves, students, and community volunteers. The contrast between the two locations was impossible to ignore. One side of the screen showed powerful executives inside a luxury skyscraper. The other showed a teenager helping children in a neighborhood learning center. Jordan looked confused but polite. Good afternoon. Horizon's chief executive officer smiled. Good afternoon, Jordan. Nathan remained silent. Several executives introduced themselves. Jordan listened respectfully. Then Horizon's chief operating officer asked the first question. Can you explain how your model identifies customer risk before traditional reporting systems? Jordan immediately began answering. Within minutes, the room became completely focused on him. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Jordan explained the concepts clearly and simply. Complex problems suddenly sounded understandable. He answered technical questions, financial questions, operational questions. Every response demonstrated preparation and insight. Nathan watched in silence. The same idea he had dismissed in less than 30 seconds was now holding the attention of every executive in the room. Then Horizon's chief executive officer smiled and asked one final question. Jordan, if you were sitting at this table today, what would be the first thing you would change? The room became silent, because everyone suddenly realized the answer might determine whether the partnership survived. The question hung in the air as every executive waited for Jordan Brooks to answer. On one side of the video screen sat leaders responsible for billions of dollars in revenue. On the other side sat a 13-year-old boy inside a community learning center surrounded by books, laptops, and students finishing their evening assignments. Jordan thought carefully before speaking. The first thing I would change is not the technology. Several executives exchanged curious glances. Horizon's chief executive officer leaned forward. What would you change? Jordan looked directly into the camera. The way information moves through the company. The room became quiet. Nathan Whitmore listened closely. Jordan continued. Most businesses collect enough data to identify problems early. The challenge is making sure the right people actually pay attention to the signals. Ethan smiled slightly. He already understood where Jordan was going. Jordan opened a diagram from his tablet and shared it through the video call. The screen filled with a simple flowchart. Unlike the complex reports displayed earlier, this one was easy to understand. If warning signs stay trapped inside departments, nobody sees the full picture, Jordan explained. But if information moves faster, companies can respond before customers decide to leave. Horizon's executives studied the diagram. Several immediately began taking notes. One senior analyst nodded repeatedly. Another executive whispered something to a colleague. The reaction was impossible to miss. Jordan was not simply answering questions anymore. He was helping shape the discussion. Nathan sat silently, watching the conversation unfold. Every answer revealed something he had failed to recognize earlier that day. Jordan did not speak like someone trying to impress people. He spoke like someone trying to solve a problem. Horizon's chief operating officer smiled. You know what I find interesting? Jordan shook his head. No, ma'am. She pointed toward the chart. This solution is practical. Several executives agreed. She continued. Many people identify problems. Fewer people create systems that organizations can actually use. Jordan thanked her politely. Then the chief executive officer from Horizon looked toward Nathan. I believe we have heard enough. The room became still. Everyone knew what those words could mean. Nathan folded his hands together. Horizon's leadership team quietly discussed the proposal among themselves for several minutes. Nobody interrupted. Finally, the chief executive officer looked up. We are willing to continue discussions regarding the partnership. A visible wave of relief moved across Whitmore Technologies' side of the table. But the executive was not finished. However, we would like Jordan's model evaluated as part of the implementation strategy. Several Whitmore executives smiled immediately. Ethan looked relieved. Nathan remained thoughtful. Then the Horizon executive looked toward Jordan on the screen. You reminded us of something important today. Jordan listened quietly. Good ideas do not become valuable because of who presents them. He paused. They become valuable because they solve real problems. The room fell silent. Nathan lowered his eyes briefly. The lesson was impossible to ignore. Then Horizon's chief operating officer asked Jordan one final question. Has anyone from Whitmore Technologies formally invited you to continue developing this project? Jordan hesitated. No, ma'am. Several executives looked toward Nathan. Ethan looked toward Nathan. Even Horizon's leadership team looked toward Nathan. Because everyone in the room suddenly realized there was one decision that still had not been made. And only one person had the authority to make it. The conference room remained silent after Jordan Brooks answered the question. On the giant video screen, the 13-year-old sat calmly inside the community learning center, completely unaware that every executive in the room was waiting for the same person to speak. Nathan Whitmore looked around the table. He saw expectation on the faces of Horizon's leadership team. He saw curiosity on the faces of his own executives. Most of all, he saw the consequences of a decision he had made only hours earlier. For the first time that day, Nathan stopped thinking like a negotiator. He stopped thinking like a chief executive officer. Instead, he thought about a simple moment at the innovation showcase. A student had presented an idea. A student had asked a question, and he had chosen not to listen. Nathan slowly stood from his chair. The room became even quieter. He looked directly at Jordan on the screen. You are right. Several executives glanced at one another. Nathan continued before anyone could react. Earlier today, you presented an idea that deserved more attention than I gave it. Jordan listened without interrupting. Nathan took a breath. I made a mistake. The words carried unusual weight. People were accustomed to hearing successful leaders explain decisions. They were not accustomed to hearing them admit fault so openly. Nathan looked toward Horizon's leadership team. The solution we needed was available before this meeting started. Then he looked back at Jordan, and I failed to recognize it. The room remained silent. Jordan nodded respectfully. Thank you for saying that. Nathan smiled faintly. The response somehow made the moment even more meaningful. No anger, no resentment, no attempt to embarrass anyone, just honesty. Nathan folded his hands. Jordan, on behalf of Whitmore Technologies, I would like to formally invite you to participate in our Innovation Development Program. Several executives immediately smiled. Ethan Walker looked relieved. Nathan continued. You would work with our engineers, analysts, and leadership teams to further develop your model. Jordan blinked in surprise. For a moment, he seemed unsure what to say. Finally, he smiled. I would like that. A ripple of laughter and applause moved through both sides of the meeting. Even Horizon's executives joined in. Then Horizon's chief executive officer stood as well. Before we conclude, I would like to add something. The room became quiet again. He looked directly at Jordan. Today, you reminded all of us that great ideas do not depend on age, titles, or job descriptions. He paused. They depend on insight, effort, and courage. Jordan thanked him politely. Then the executive turned toward Nathan. As for the partnership, we are prepared to move forward. Relief spread across the room immediately. Months of work had been saved, but everyone understood something important. The agreement survived because somebody was willing to learn from a mistake. Nathan looked toward the city skyline beyond the conference room windows. Only a few hours earlier, he had walked away from a conversation believing experience alone gave him the right answers. Now he understood something different. Leadership was not about having every answer. Leadership was about being willing to listen when the answer came from an unexpected place. As the meeting ended and executives began shaking hands, Jordan returned to helping students at the community center. The partnership moved forward. The innovation program welcomed its newest participant. And long after the contracts were signed, many people remembered the same lesson. The most expensive mistake in business is not missing an opportunity. It is ignoring a voice simply because you never expected wisdom to come from it.